Okay, right. Well, moving on to one of my favourite stories of the new year, and that is the news that France and Britain have made a deal to share the Bayeux Tapestry. Now, this rather what share is the wrong word. Sorry, we will borrow the no sorry. We will be lent. We will we hang on. Let me just go back. Okay, here's a way of putting it. The Bayeux Tapestry will be displayed in the UK for the first time. There we go. And
You mean for the first time since it was embroidered by women in Canterbury, in Canterbury in the period when William the Conqueror's half-brother, Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, was the Archbishop of Canterbury, don't you?
and indeed, yes, when it was likely in his palace in Kent, I think.
Indeed.
Yeah. So actually, this isn't for the first time. Oh, right. There's no way to talk about this that isn't going to annoy someone. But yeah, in short, yeah, a deal has been reached between, I suppose, on a governmental level, France and Britain for the Bayeux Tapestry to come to the UK. At the moment, it's thought in 2020 for a stay and a display. Now, there are a few things here that I find interesting, and we'll come on to
there are a few things here I find really funny, actually.
and we'll come on to that and the sort of some of the political things in a moment. But one of the things actually is where it will be displayed. People have just been assuming it would be the British Museum, but now the battlefield site of Hastings, the English Heritage Site, I do believe, is also making an application to display because there is actually a memorial church built by William the Conqueror not too far from the battle where it could be displayed as well. So the fighting has begun. What's your take on this story?
Well, first of all, I'd sort of promised myself I wasn't going to use the B word today because we've talked about it before, but you've already used it, so I'm now free to use the word Brexit.
Oh, I see.
My take on it, and also I am biased, as you might have gathered earlier. I'm originally from just outside Canterbury, so we're talking about something that was a product of my from my home area.
When you were a young man. When I was a young man.
Yeah. Well, certainly a lot of historians, a number of historians would argue that it was possibly made in Canterbury.
Well, actually, should we just take a look at that from an archaeological historical perspective? Because actually, this is an interesting thing for those of you at home who might be interested in this. Because I've been doing some research, because it just so happens that I've been working on a video about Bayeux Tapestry. There is lots of evidence that it was made in England, even though there are some French scholars who contest this. One of those things actually is the way in which Latin is used in the tapestry. It is in a sort of with an English bias, or this kind of thing. The style is kind of Anglo-Saxon in its origins. And also lots of the colours are colours that were commonly used in for example, other products such as the Lindisfarne Gospels. The same sort of techniques for colouring in that case the pages, in this case the wool and the dye, the yarn. So yeah,
and we should clarify, of course, it's an embroidery and not a tapestry.
Yes, and actually that's the other thing as well. Yeah, it's not a tapestry, and there has been a I would argue less than successful push by some historians to call it the Bayeux embroidery, which again I came across during my research. I was like, oh, interesting, the Bayeux embroidery. No, I don't think that'll get many clicks. It's got to be tapestry.
Yep.
But anyway, sorry, you were saying?
No, simply what I find most interesting about the whole thing is the way we can imbue these objects with all sorts of modern resonances for cultural historians and people who look at these issues. The Bayeux Tapestry has to be one of the most iconic objects of its kind in the world. Actually, as you say, it's instant clickbait, as we've seen in the media coverage of this particular story. As I suspect, President Macron was fully aware when he made the offer. What I find intriguing about the thing, it's a wonderful there is no contention. It's a wonderful historical document. What it actually means, we can argue about for a long, long time, and those other issues. But it is it's a wonderful historical artifact, and we're lucky to still have it. You know, it survived a fire. It survived being kidnapped by Napoleon. It survived being kidnapped by the Germans during World War II, and so on. So, you know, we have this wonderful thing. Of course, it's a very generous thing for the French government to offer to lend one of its great national treasures. The fact that they're closing the museum in Bayeux for refurbishment, and therefore they'd have to store it anyway. So why not just let the Brits pay for the storage? Is one aspect of this was maybe overlooked in some of the coverage. And the other thing, of course, in the context of Brexit, having an embroidery displayed in the UK, which depicts England being attacked, being taken over, defeated and taken over by people speaking French, is just a monumental piece of trolling, isn't it? I mean, it's you know, in the current context, it's really satirical.
It is quite satirical, and you know, some people have, I think, taken that a bit too far. For example, certain Tory MPs have been convinced that this is, you know, essentially we should burn it when it arrives. You know, and it's fascinating, really, given how actually integral the Bayeux Tapestry is in so many ways to, especially I suppose, the English identity, but certainly in general British identity, and I mean, this may be controversial to say. You know, just brace yourself.
I'm braced.
Okay, but we have, by definition, woven into the very words we use every day, an extraordinarily complex relationship with the continent of Europe, and I think this, you know, for some people, this has always been seen as a cultural cataclysm. For example, J.R. Tolkien famously saw the arrival of the Normans as monumentally destructive for native Saxon traditions of literature and language, and for example, it's one of the reasons why actually, you know, people often talk about the Old English language, but actually what we have is a series of dialects. The representation of Old English is not as solid as, for example, Old Norse is. And this is in part because of what happened when the Normans arrived. That said, though, the Normans were the Northmen who arrived in northern France, and they'd come from Scandinavia, and in the same year you had the then modern Vikings, Harald Hardrada, etc., trying to invade Britain in 1066, and you also had the Normans or Northmen from. Yeah, my point is we've all been moving around an awful lot on this continent for a long time,
and if you just look at the 11th century, you have Edward the Confessor, who pegs in at the beginning of the Bayeux Tapestry, was married to a Norman, which is where a lot of the political interest from
who was
William comes from.
The great aunt, I think, of William the Conqueror.
Indeed, yeah. Indeed.
Or William the Bastard. Yes. Or
you might say that. I couldn't possibly.
That was his name. That was his name. Or as my geography teacher used to call him, Bill the Basher.
Right.
He turned up. He bashed everyone.
Actually, I thought the real basher in that family was Odo of Bayeux, because he was a bishop. He couldn't carry a bladed weapon and shed blood, so he carried a mace instead.
Oh yeah, yes. It's much more spiritually sound to crush a man's skull than it is to stab him.
Exactly, as seen in the Bayeux Tapestry.
Absolutely.
But if you go right back to the beginning of the 11th century, you have a political ferment for about 15-20 years, and then you end up we have Scandinavian kings on the throne of England. We have Canute and his immediate successor. Obviously, the dynasty failed in the end, but and Edward was seen as English, but the culture, is international. I think that's the thing that I get most from this story, actually, is that what the Bayeux Tapestry in a microcosm shows is actually what a cosmopolitan place 11th century England was. Again, it was part of Europe. There was interchange across the Channel. There were dynastic marriages. And in fact, by the beginning of the 12th century, I mean, one of my favourite novelists, and I'm sure many archaeologists may even have come into the profession partly because of the work of somebody like novelist Rosemary Sutcliffe, who famously wrote The Eagle of the Night, but she also wrote another novel called Knightsfee, which is also set in Sussex, and it's set early in the reign, or late in the reign of William II, William Rufus, and in the early part of the reign of Henry I, and it deals with the generation that comes after the invasion of 1066, and one of the underlying themes in all her writing, but in this book particularly, is continuity and connection. And it makes the point that within 30 years of the conquest, English soldiers are fighting alongside Norman landlords in France to defend the Norman King of England at the Battle of Tinchebray.
Yeah.
So this idea that somehow England was reduced to nothing and abject slavery under the Norman yoke, it's rubbish.
It is rubbish. And also, I mean, something which, again, I really do appreciate. I love being from Wales because it gives us this wonderful little perspective on this island. Because, for a start, as far as the Saxons are concerned, the Sassenach, as the Scottish would say, they are people who came onto the island, came in, but also at the same time, then you had the Normans turning up, and then actually what we have is a whole host of weird political crisscrossing, a real patchwork of effect that comes about in the geopolitical landscape in Wales, in Ireland, in the borders of Scotland. This is one of the reasons why I love history and archaeology, is that it's a wonderfully complicated story, but at the same time, I mean, there is a famous book, is there not? 1066 and all that.
Yes.
This is one of the key dates that we measure British history around, but also it's just one of those things that's just integral to our reckoning of, okay, so the Romans and then the Vikings and then 1066, and it's just so important. And whether you're engaging with it simply as an exciting thing, as a symbol, or if you're really interested in the reality of the history surrounding it, having it come to Britain would be fascinating. Now
it'll be wonderful. Well, I mean, the other thing, you were talking about the discussions that are going to be ongoing about where it's actually displayed. This immediately reminded me of again. This story in microcosm tells us so much about ourselves then, but also ourselves now, and particularly about the heritage industry. And it reminds me of nothing more than the contest, which went down to a legal case about whether the remains of Richard III would end up in Leicester or York.
Oh yes.
And that people actually went to law over that. Yeah. And it was about tourist footfall and the tourist pound.
Well, as they say, in higher political circles, we need to find a way to disagree with grace, and hopefully that's what happens around this tapestry coming here. But also, actually, just very quickly, we've got a couple of minutes left in the segment. I would like to propose that maybe we consider doing like a pay it forward. So we get Bayeux Tapestry for, I don't know, a year or two. We maybe return the Parthenon marbles for a year or two. What does Greece have that someone might want?
I think Greece could get given a pass, actually, because actually we've had the Parthenon marbles for 200 years. So
well, France has had the Bayeux Tapestry for close to 1,000 years.
But if it was, if it was a family art, patronage and a family commission, it was there by rights. So
Tremendous
Yeah.
tongue-in-cheek people.
Actually, given the way how this is the level this the level of political debate regarding history in this country. My favourite are the Conservative MPs, surprisingly to some maybe on perhaps the Brexit wing of the party, who have suggested that in fact what we lend to France is the fragment of a battle flag that was flown from HMS Victory on the Battle of Trafalgar that was just sold for £250,000.
To who? To Jacob Rees-Mogg or someone like that, presumably.
I don't know, to be honest, but
Man of the people from the 17th century, yes.
that's the MP for the 1850s. But no, in all seriousness, it's. I think this is the wonderful thing about this is why people who say history is not relevant, and that I was listening to that there's been a suggestion from again another Conservative MP that people who don't study useful degrees like computing and engineering should pay more for their tuition than those who do, which is an argument that's been cropping up from time to time for many years. But if you don't understand history, you don't understand why these things are important. And I think the other thing as well is that.
Well, but also the last thing you want is people studying history only coming from a constituency of the wealthy.
Yes.
Or in the past, just wealthy men, for example. That's how we end up in a situation where where history is used and abused in horrible ways.
And also, one final point I'd want to make in this, and you mentioned 1066 and all that, and it's a wonderful book. And I think it ends with that wonderful line about an America was discovered and history came to a complete, which, given the current incumbents of the White House, he said, perhaps not controversially, we might view that line as being prescient. But in all seriousness, I think if you study history as a series of full stops tied to dates, without looking at the context, that's when it's very easy to misrepresent the history. We've talked about it in our earlier segments about. Or we were talking about it earlier, rather, in terms of before we started recording, about the English landscape. It's all about continuity. It's all about layers of meaning built on top of each other. And what we do as archaeologists and historians is tease out those stories and hopefully make them clear for people to understand where they came from. Maybe if they want to look at it in those terms, certainly enjoy and just feel, not an isolated individual, but maybe part of something that has a great deal of history and continuity and meaning, and is important on those grounds.
Yeah. Well, and finally, will you go and see it if it does actually arrive here?
Well, I have been lucky enough to see it in Bayeux, so and I would happily see it again. I think it'll be like any major exhibition these days. The lovely thing about seeing it in Bayeux is, although Bayeux it's a wonderful town, it's survived by and large in World War II, which its near neighbour Caen didn't, which was equally historic and of course was very significant in terms of William's dukedom. But it'll obviously be if it happens, it'll be a very major exhibition. I would happily see it again, yeah. And I would urge anybody who hasn't seen it to see it. It is a fabulous artifact.
And hopefully you'll be able to buy in the gift shop. I'd love to see loo rolls printed.
But you see, as a Welshman, you'd love to see that happening to the Normans, wouldn't you?
I would. Yes. No, but that said, though, I love the Welsh language, but I also really appreciate actually what the Normans brought to the English language. The adaptability of English as it is today, the wide range of words we have, little, large, big, and small, or the doubling up of meanings that don't have to be there. It's part of the tapestry of Britain.
Indeed.